Hello, everyone. My name is Prishila Durab. I'm a Vice President Director of the Health Implementation Science Center at NORC at the University of Chicago. I'm thrilled today to be presenting to you on the technology landscape of patient-centered clinical decision support. Where are we and what is needed? Before I get started, I wanted to acknowledge my collaborators on this research study, including Krista Haney-Howes, Lauren Hovey, Shana Sandberg, and Priyanka Desai from NORC, David Lobach and Aziz Boksawala from Alamo Informatics, and Dean Sadiq from the Texas Health Science Center. I would also like to acknowledge our funder, the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. We are very grateful for our support and funding of this study. To begin with, I wanted to contextualize the relevance of this work. Value-based care is a model where healthcare systems and providers are based on patient outcomes. In this model, providers are rewarded for helping patients improve their health, reduce the effects and incidence of chronic disease, and live healthier lives using evidence-based guidelines. To realize this vision of value-based care, we need to use patient-provided data in the development of the evidence-based guidelines, the careful translation of these guidelines into decision support tools, which enable the delivery of guidance to both patients and providers in the right time. Within the US, policy initiatives like the 21st Century Cures Act have created new expectations across the healthcare system for patient participation in both data generation, access, and its use. In my talk, I'm going to focus on what specifically is needed for patient-centered CDS. Clinical decision support, in short form, CDS tools, have traditionally disseminated clinical evidence to clinicians rather than patients. Patient-centered CDS is different in that way, in that it supports individual patients and their caregivers or care teams in health-related decisions and actions by leveraging information that is derived from patient-centered outcomes research and/or patient-specific information. We had three primary research objectives for the study. The first was to assess the current state of standards for PCCDS. The second was to identify gaps and challenges within the standards landscape. And the third was to identify future directions for the PCCDS community. We used three primary data sources. The first was convening a 22-member technical expert panel. They represented a diverse set of stakeholders, including informaticians and standards experts, health system representatives, patient advocates, electronic health record and content vendors, and the federal informants. We also conducted a review of both the gray and the peer-reviewed literature, and we interviewed a convenient sample of 18 individuals from diverse disciplines and sectors related to patient-centered CDS. Based on these data sources, we used a model of the PCCDS technical landscape, which aligned with 4 phases of development. This includes prioritizing, identification of the guidelines, authoring, translation of those guidelines into CDS tools, implementing, deployment of these PCCDS tools into the delivery system, and then measuring the effect of these tools on patient outcomes. We also considered external factors that influence the design, development, and implementation of patient-centered CDS. We identified 10 salient technical considerations, which I will discuss in the remainder of my presentation. To begin with, the prioritization phase includes both the identification and the prioritization of evidence-based guidelines for translation and dissemination, applying objective measures. Under this phase, we identified standards and guidelines for increasing patient trust and safety as a primary consideration. We found that both patients and providers may not trust PCCDS tools due to the lack of transparency in the development of these tools, as well as their underlying knowledge base. Several suggestions were raised for improving trust and safety, including increasing the federal government engagement with the standards development community and the health system stakeholders. Key informants suggested that in order to address the potential risks posed by unvetted or unreliable patient-centered CDS tools, the federal government should take an active role in convening stakeholders to discuss the most effective ways to prioritize and develop guidance on best practices for health app developers. For example, this could take the form of an ethical or safety framework. Another idea was the development of a rating system that the health app industry could use to certify apps that have met certain safety and quality criteria, particularly when they involve decision-making support. And finally, In addition, requiring app developers to demonstrate that they follow good software engineering practices in hazard analysis in the development of their products, they design for safety, and they document these designs to verify that their systems work as they had intended. The authoring phase includes the translation of PCOR evidence into standard-based CDS. Consideration 2 focus on the standards for representing these clinical recommendations. A central challenge to knowledge translation is the heterogeneity in the translation of evidence-based guidelines. There are several reasons for this. Primary amongst them is the variability created when multiple clinical practice guidelines are developed for the same clinical condition. This is further exacerbated when electronic health record vendors and healthcare systems develop site or product-specific CDS interventions, meaning that the CDS guidance may differ by stakeholder depending on which guideline was selected, how the guideline was interpreted, and then translated into computable knowledge. To address this challenge, we identified two primary approaches. One is to leverage initiatives like the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's program called Adapting Clinical Guidelines for the Digital Age. This initiative focuses on developing a standard process for guideline translation and improving the timeliness, accuracy, and consistency with which guidelines are translated and implemented. A second was promoting the adoption of existing standards like the clinical quality language, a standard used for knowledge representation. To date, SQL has seen limited industry adoption and particularly low adoption amongst health IT developers. A third consideration focuses on standardizing the data elements for patient-generated health data. PGHD includes different data sources, such as when patients manually enter data into a personal health record or an app, data collected from activity trackers, such as a Fitbit, or devices, such as blood pressure cuffs that automatically transmit data. The diversity of data and devices used to collect PGHD creates a challenge when managing data across multiple platforms. Further directions in this area should really focus on developing and piloting standards for different types of patient-generated health data and to promote the sharing and exchange of these data via the expansion of the HL7 FHIR profiles. Critical to the use of patient-centered CDS is how it is implemented. The implementation of PCCDS focuses on the 5 rights of CDS developed by Osherov. This includes delivering the right information to the right user through the right channels in the right intervention formats at the right time. Consideration 4 focuses on the integration of patient-generated health data into electronic health records. As discussed, PGHD encompasses a wide range of data that flows directly from a patient to a provider. In discussions with providers, we heard that while healthcare providers report a preference for integrating PGHD into existing clinical workflows, there has been a tremendous limitation in how electronic health record vendors are able to accept and present this data back to providers. The reason for this lack of integration is multifaceted, including the lack of interfaces, limited EHR capability on how to store and display this data, and then inconsistent provider engagement in the use of patient-generated health data. Future directions should really focus on the development of these data exchange standards, which are either lacking, immature, or not widely available for implementation. Another significant consideration is managing the volume of PGHD. PGHD, as you can imagine, can include large volumes of both synchronous or asynchronous data, which can be difficult to manage, process, and review without intelligent filtering or summarization. Furthermore, providers are justifiably concerned about the volume of data that they may need to review and respond to, and furthermore may be held liable for if they do not carefully process and act upon the data. Future directions in this area should really focus on methods to curate and control PGHD flow so that what providers get is meaningful and actionable data. Conceivably, one could consider the development of third-party apps whose primary purpose is to aggregate the raw data into some kind of meaningful synthesis. Providers also indicate an interest in having intuitive data visualization that would allow them to focus on important clinical information. Another important consideration is managing data provenance. Today, there is no gold standard or single validated approach for assessing whether PGHD is of adequate quality and the source of that PGHD. As part of considering how to capture and how to represent data provenance in the EHR, careful thought should be given to whether external data should be shown separately, seamlessly merged with the native data, or combined with the native data but with a distinguishing appearance. Likewise, careful thought should be given to whether and how data from other sources need to be validated and what is the effect of that validation. Future directions in this area should focus on the use of unique device identifiers, which has the potential to convey device provenance information and could provide valuable linkages between PGHD and devices, developing new methods for verification of PGHD through trusted sources, such as information captured within the EHR and that provided from a patient. And finally, the need to improve the data provenance rules in the FHIR implementation guides. Consideration 7 focused on the FHIR standards for information exchange. While it is true that FHIR standards have greatly improved access to data, particularly for CDS, amongst others, several issues remain, including variable implementation, inconsistent availability of these standards across electronic health record vendors, and limited functionality. Future directions should really focus on enhancing the specificity of the US core FHIR profiles to support interoperability, so that there is a use of a standard terminology rather than something vendor or institution specific. Development and use of FHIR-based questionnaires to facilitate the collection of data from patients and sharing that data with others. Consideration 8 really focused on specialized APIs, such as those focused around CDS hooks. Key informants noted that a lack of FHIR APIs to access data in the EHR for use in PCCDS is a significant limitation. To date, many of the APIs that are made available are largely limited to reading data and do not support writing data back from apps to the EHR. Furthermore, the lack of CDS hook triggers to invoke CDS is a significant limitation. There's wide variation across electronic health record vendors on where specifically to place CDS trigger points. For example, provided dose checking as soon as an order is entered versus when a whole set of orders are entered. Additionally, most EHR vendors severely limit these integration points, only enabling a hook in response to a patient's chart being opened. Future directions should really focus on promoting the use of FHIR APIs that allow data to be written back to the electronic health record so that they can support real-time provider interactions, such as during order entry and clinical documentation. There is also a significant need for standardized CDS insertion points into clinical workflows. Standardized measurement is critical to ensuring that PCCDS interventions measurably improve clinician and patient decision-making, care processes, and finally outcomes. Consideration 9 focused on the standardization of patient-centered outcomes. We found in the published literature that the focus to date has predominantly been on measuring aspects of PCCDS related to implementation processes, such as the acceptability or usability and feasibility of interventions. Future directions should really focus on engaging patients and caregivers across the measurement lifecycle to ensure that PCCDS research is measuring what matters to patients and their families. Focus on identifying and measuring a targeted set of outcomes for PCCDS effectiveness and the impact on clinical outcomes, should be given consideration. As mentioned, the external factors really refer to those that include the marketplace, policy, legal, regulatory, and governance issues that impact the development, design, and dissemination of patient-centered CDS. Consideration 10 focuses largely on the privacy and security standards. Today, the lack of standards that address privacy and security, particularly those around patient-generated health data, is becoming increasingly problematic. Given the importance of the use of patient-provided information that can be included in patient-centered CDS, there is a need for further refinement on how patient data can be shared and information that is made available to the patient about practices that app vendors and others use around the capture and use of patient data. Future direction should focus on the development of standards, policies, and guidelines regarding the use and ownership of PGHD. App developers need to be transparent about their data use and ownership policies so that patients, in conjunction with their providers, can make informed choices about when and how to create and transmit patient-generated health data. So in conclusion, PCCDS is challenging because patient-centered focus accentuates the complex, adaptive, socio-technical systems involved. Furthermore, these challenges increase exponentially when you combine the complexity of the healthcare delivery system with the systems required to design, develop, implement, and deliver high-quality, evidence-based, patient-centered CDS tool that both meet the patient's and providers' needs and fit into their respective lifestyles. While we have made significant progress in development and implementation, several technical considerations remain. Thank you all so much for your time. If you have any questions or follow-up, you can reach me at this email address. Thank you.